Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Jordan Ashford had once believed that stepping into Jen Sidwell's orbit would be a temporary measure, a dangerous but calculated move that would ultimately bring him down. Her intentions had been clear from the start: infiltrate his empire, observe from within, and quietly gather the kind of irrefutable evidence that no lawyer, no bribe, and no hidden connection could shield him from. For Jordan, who had always lived by the law and by the ideals of justice, this undercover assignment was supposed to reaffirm her values, not compromise them. Yet as the weeks turned into months, she began to realize that proximity to power came at a steep and corrosive cost. At first, the allure of Sidwell's world had felt like nothing more than a temporary disguise she was forced to wear. But that disguise soon became a skin she could not so easily shed. The vast paychecks, the chauffeur-driven cars, the penthouse apartment with its gleaming glass windows overlooking the city skyline, all of it began to weave itself into the fabric of her daily existence. Jordan had once been a woman accustomed to the modest routines of law enforcement, defined more by her duty than by personal luxury. Now she found herself surrounded by expensive furniture chosen by renowned designers, sipping wine from collections she never thought she'd own, and sleeping in silken sheets that symbolized not just wealth but the subtle shift in her identity. Anna Devane, a woman who had always been able to see through facades, recognized the change before Jordan admitted it to herself. Anna's instincts told her that Jordan was walking a fine line between professional duty and dangerous indulgence. From Anna's perspective, Jordan was no longer playing the part of Sidwell's employee, she was becoming it. That transformation troubled Anna deeply because she knew what it meant when an agent embedded in corruption began to grow too comfortable. The line between loyalty to the mission and complicity in the crime blurred dangerously. To Anna, Jordan's new lifestyle wasn't just comfort, it was temptation disguised as reward, a slow erosion of the very principles Jordan had once sworn to uphold. Sidwell himself was a master manipulator, a man who thrived in shadows and who had built a reputation not only on ruthless decisions but on his uncanny ability to conceal them. His world was one of carefully constructed facades, hidden ledgers, and layers of protection designed to keep law enforcement at bay. He had slipped through the cracks of justice for years, not because he was untouchable, but because he was meticulous. He erased trails before they could be discovered, bought silence where voices threatened to rise, and cloaked his actions in the thin veneer of legitimacy. Jordan, now seated at his table, saw firsthand how effortlessly he could twist the truth into a business deal or bury a crime beneath the weight of bureaucracy. Yet even the most careful criminal is vulnerable to error. Sidwell's arrogance was both his shield and his weakness. The more he relied on Jordan, the more he trusted her, the greater the possibility that he would let something slip. Jordan knew this and watched carefully, waiting for that inevitable mistake. She told herself she would seize the moment when it came, that her purpose had not been lost amid the champagne and gold trimmings. But beneath that conviction, another voice whispered, the one that asked her whether she really wanted Sidwell to fall, whether she was ready to destroy the very foundation of her new life. This conflict burned quietly within her. She remembered who she had been before Sidwell, the woman guided by duty, determined to protect the innocent and stand for what was right. But the woman she was becoming now found excuses in the luxury that wrapped itself around her. Wasn't it easier to turn a blind eye when her days were filled with beauty, when her nights were softened by comfort? Wasn't it safer to let Sidwell continue his careful balancing act, as long as she reaped the benefits of his empire? The truth was simple and cruel: Jordan was no longer just infiltrating Sidwell's world. She was living in it, enjoying it, and to some degree, protecting it. The price of justice was beginning to look like too heavy a burden, especially when it meant sacrificing everything she had grown to love in this new life. But Jordan also knew that one undeniable piece of evidence could change everything. If she discovered proof so damning that it could not be ignored, then even she would be unable to justify silence. It would have to be something monstrous, something that transcended her own desires and forced her hand back onto the path she had once vowed to walk. And in Sidwell's empire, where shadows hid more than just money and power, such a secret was bound to exist. She only had to decide whether she was truly ready to find it, and to use it. The turning point came with brutal suddenness when Maxie Jones collapsed live on the set of Home and Heart. What began as a light-hearted broadcast, meant to showcase charm and consumer appeal, became a scene of chaos that horrified viewers and left the studio crew paralyzed with fear. Maxie's sudden fainting spell was not simply a dramatic moment for television, it was the opening crack in the wall Sidwell had spent years fortifying around himself. The fall of a single woman in front of cameras rippled outward, triggering questions that reached far beyond the bright lights of the studio. As Maxie lay unconscious, the small details of the scene took on a sinister meaning. Among the scattered items from the fall was a seemingly harmless jar of skincare cream, its lid loosened, the glossy product inside tainted by something invisible. At first glance, it might have been dismissed as nothing more than a prop in the wrong place at the wrong time. But in the world Sidwell controlled, there were no coincidences. That jar, insignificant to the untrained eye, held the secret to a crime so carefully orchestrated that only those who understood poison could unravel its design. Medical tests later revealed what the jar had concealed, an unusual enzyme in Maxie's blood, a compound that had no natural place in her body. It was not a mistake of diet, not a random allergic reaction, but the deliberate fingerprint of a toxin engineered with precision. Whoever planned the attack knew exactly how to administer it, knew how to avoid immediate detection, and counted on the collapse to look like a health scare rather than an act of violence. To the authorities, it was enough to open a door into darker suspicions. To Jordan Ashford, it was the first undeniable clue that Sidwell's shadow stretched further than she had dared to admit. Jordan's access to Sidwell's inner circle gave her an advantage few others had. She was privy to his appointments, his late-night calls, and the subtle connections that linked his empire together. If anyone could trace the poison jar back to its origin, it was her. Yet the discovery forced her into the greatest internal conflict of her career. She could no longer pretend that her time with Sidwell was simply a mission cloaked in indulgence. The possibility that he had orchestrated an attack on Maxie turned her silent complicity into something perilously close to betrayal, not only of her own oath but of the victims now suffering because of him. If she uncovered undeniable proof that Sidwell had ordered Maxie's poisoning, Jordan knew there would be no turning back. Such evidence would demand action, and action meant detonating the fragile life she had built. Her luxurious apartment, the security of her new salary, the illusion of stability, all of it would vanish the moment she chose to expose him. It was not simply a question of career or finances, it was the destruction of the identity she had slowly grown into, the erasure of the woman who had learned to live in Sidwell's world. The choice confronting Jordan was brutal in its simplicity. She could remain silent, protect the life she had come to enjoy, and bury the evidence that tied Sidwell to Maxie's suffering. Or she could step back into the role of the officer she once was, the woman defined by integrity, and ignite a war that would not only end Sidwell's reign but consume her own life in the process. The poison jar was more than evidence, it was a mirror, forcing her to confront what she valued more, justice or survival. And as Maxie's condition grew more dire, with doctors warning of potential coma and long-term damage, the weight of that decision pressed heavier against Jordan's conscience. For every day Maxie lingered between life and death, the silence Jordan maintained became its own kind of crime. Maxie Jones's collapse did not simply end with the chaos on the Home and Heart set. The shock of seeing her body crumple under the studio lights carried through the city like an echo of dread. Her friends rushed to the hospital, her family circled the waiting room in helpless worry, and the press swarmed around the story with endless speculation. Doctors spoke in measured tones, using words that offered little comfort: coma, long-term damage, uncertain prognosis. Each hour that passed without improvement carved deeper wounds into the people who loved her. Lulu's hands trembled when she tried to sign medical forms. Felicia lingered at her daughter's bedside, whispering prayers into the silence. The once bustling life of Maxie, filled with ambition, charm, and relentless energy, was now reduced to the stillness of a woman locked in a battle against poison. For Jordan Ashford, the scene at the hospital was not only heartbreaking but damning. She knew what others could not, that Maxie's fall was unlikely to have been chance or fate. The peculiar enzyme in Maxie's blood, discovered by toxicology, confirmed something deliberate, something engineered. Jordan had spent enough time in Sidwell's shadow to know the pattern: cruelty disguised as business, power enforced through fear, and silence purchased with wealth. The poisoning was his kind of signature, precise, hidden, and devastating. It was the kind of crime that left no trace of his hand, only the suffering of his victims. And yet, Jordan now had proximity that others did not. She had the vantage point of someone inside his circle, someone whom Sidwell himself had begun to rely on. But proximity was a double-edged sword. With every secret she glimpsed, with every meeting she attended, Jordan felt herself sinking deeper into a world that rewarded complicity with unimaginable comfort. Her luxurious apartment gleamed with symbols of her success: the handwoven rugs imported from Morocco, the designer glass that refracted light across the high-ceilinged rooms, the scent of fresh lilies delivered weekly without her even asking. All of these things whispered to her that she could stay here forever, that she could have everything she wanted if she just kept her silence. And it was that whisper, seductive and insidious, that made her hesitate. Yet in the sterile whiteness of the hospital, where machines hummed steadily beside Maxie's bed, Jordan's conscience stirred like a storm. Here was a woman whose future had been stolen by someone's deliberate cruelty, a woman whose daughter might grow up motherless, whose friends might lose her forever. Jordan had always believed that her purpose was to protect lives like Maxie's, not to stand by while they were destroyed. The contradiction between her oath and her actions gnawed at her, pushing her closer to a breaking point. Sidwell himself seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around him. In his mind, Jordan had proven her loyalty. He had begun to treat her as more than just an employee, confiding in her about projects, hinting at alliances, and even allowing her glimpses into files that others would have been killed for touching. That trust was dangerous. It was a weapon Jordan could use against him, but it was also a trap. The more he relied on her, the more deeply she was implicated in his empire. If she turned against him, she would not only destroy him, she would destroy herself. The balance of power teetered with each interaction. Jordan saw it in the way Sidwell allowed himself small moments of arrogance, moments where he dropped his guard because he believed she would protect him. She noticed how he sometimes left papers on his desk a little too long, how he allowed conversations to slip into more revealing territory. Each instance offered her the chance to seize what she needed, evidence that could end his reign. But with each chance came the heavy knowledge that acting on it would mean tearing down the life she had built in his shadow. Meanwhile, Maxie's condition grew worse. The doctors spoke of swelling, of brain activity that dipped and rose unpredictably, of chances that narrowed with each passing day. Her loved ones clung to hope, but hope was fragile in the face of cold medical charts. Every time Jordan walked through those hospital halls, she felt the weight of their grief pressing against her chest. Each tear she saw shed over Maxie's bed was a reminder that her silence was not neutral. It was complicity. And complicity meant blood on her hands, even if she had not mixed the poison herself. General Hospital's narrative was pushing Jordan into an unbearable crucible. She was not just confronting Sidwell's crimes, she was confronting her own reflection. The poison jar was not just evidence of Sidwell's cruelty, it was a mirror held up to her soul, showing her the fractures between who she had been and who she was becoming. The decision before her was not about evidence alone. It was about identity, about whether she was still the woman who believed in justice or whether she had become the kind of person who let evil thrive because it was easier than fighting. Her options were stark. She could remain silent, keep her penthouse, her wealth, her safety, and live in the illusion that she was untouchable. But in that silence, she would also live knowing that she had abandoned Maxie, abandoned the very principles that had once defined her. Or she could act. Take the evidence, expose Sidwell, and watch as everything she had built crumbled into dust. Action would make her a target, strip her of her luxuries, and thrust her back into a life of uncertainty. But it would also give her back the integrity she had lost, the integrity she had once thought unshakable. This was the brilliance of the unfolding story. Sidwell's fate was tied directly to Jordan's courage, and Jordan's fate was tied directly to her willingness to lose everything. Maxie's coma was more than a medical tragedy, It was the final spark in a moral war Jordan could no longer avoid. Whether she chose silence or justice, the consequences would shape not only her future but the lives of everyone caught in Sidwell's shadow. And somewhere between the gleaming floors of her penthouse and the cold linoleum of Maxie's hospital room, Jordan Ashford stood trembling, knowing that the next step she took would define her forever. In the coming chapters of this unfolding saga, Jordan Ashford becomes the figure around whom every tension, suspicion, and moral reckoning will orbit. What began as a calculated infiltration has spiraled into something far more dangerous, a reckoning that threatens to destroy not just Jen Sidwell, but Jordan herself. The stage is set for a collapse that will reverberate through every corner of General Hospital, and the audience will be made to watch as choices carved in hesitation finally demand their full payment. The evidence that Jordan inches closer to uncovering is unlike anything she has ever encountered in her career. It is not a simple trail of financial records, not just coded conversations buried in Sidwell's networks, but a direct link between him and the poisoning of Maxie Jones. That poisoned jar of cream, a detail so small that it nearly disappeared in the chaos of Maxie's collapse, has become the fulcrum on which the entire narrative balances. Tests confirmed the presence of a rare enzyme, a toxin that could not have been introduced by accident. And while others speculated about faulty products or unfortunate coincidences, Jordan knew better. She knew Sidwell's methods, his ability to commission precision cruelty that left others to carry the blame. She knew the truth was darker than any public explanation. But with the truth came a mirror, and in that reflection Jordan saw herself differently than she had ever wished to. The longer she delayed, the clearer it became that silence was not neutrality, it was complicity. Maxie's stillness in that hospital bed became an indictment, each hour of her coma a wordless accusation that Jordan had stood too close to Sidwell for too long. She had taken his money, worn the comforts of his empire, and told herself it was all in service of the greater good. Yet now, when the greater good demanded action, she hesitated. And in that hesitation, she saw not the righteous officer she had once been, but a woman ensnared, dangerously close to becoming part of the very system she had set out to destroy. Sidwell, blind in his arrogance, only deepened the trap. To him, Jordan was no longer a cautious recruit to be tested but a loyal arm to be trusted. He began to confide in her, dropping fragments of plans that hinted at his larger machinations. Files that should have been hidden found their way into her view. Conversations, once veiled in coded phrases, became looser in her presence. Sidwell believed he had bent Jordan to his will, that her loyalty had been purchased not through fear but through comfort. And perhaps, in some ways, he was not wrong. For Jordan, each indulgence, each glass of wine, each night in her lavish apartment, was proof of how far she had already been pulled. But trust breeds exposure. Sidwell's reliance on Jordan created cracks in the walls he had so carefully built. Every careless word was an opportunity, every lapse in security a chance to gather the damning proof that could finally end him. Jordan knew that if she chose to act, she had the power to dismantle everything. And yet, the very act of holding that power revealed her own corruption. Why had she waited until now? Why had she allowed Maxie to fall before considering action? Why had she not walked away the moment she saw Sidwell's ruthlessness with her own eyes? The answers to those questions exposed truths she did not want to face. The looming explosion of this storyline is not simply about Sidwell being caught. It is about Jordan confronting the fact that, in her silence, she has already been changed. Evidence will cut both ways, proving Sidwell's guilt while also forcing Jordan to reckon with her delayed courage. Her colleagues will ask where she was when Maxie collapsed, how long she had known Sidwell's capabilities, why she had not acted sooner. The answers will not shield her. The audience will see her stripped bare, caught between redemption and ruin, as much a subject of judgment as Sidwell himself. Anna Devane's presence adds another layer to this crucible. Anna, who had sensed from the beginning that Jordan was growing too comfortable, will not let her escape unchallenged. Her eyes will be unrelenting, her questions cutting through every excuse Jordan might try to offer. To Anna, Jordan is not just a potential witness, she is a cautionary tale. And when the reckoning arrives, Anna may be the one to demand accountability not just from Sidwell, but from Jordan as well. Around them, the wider canvas of General Hospital will reflect the fallout. Maxie's family, broken with grief, will demand justice. Felicia's sorrow will harden into rage. Lulu's quiet devastation will transform into a plea for answers.